Greetings. I'm Shuvaloy Majumdar, Foreign Policy Program Director at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And thank you very much for tuning in to our live stream on the upcoming Summit of Democracy. With US President Joe Biden hosting world leaders in his first Summit of Democracy, much attention will be on the Indo Pacific theater itself. From the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Trans-Pacific trade talks, and conflicts from the seas to the mountain ranges, the region's great democracies are shaping a new and important international order. Alongside India and Japan, Taiwan, and democratic ASEAN nations, Canada will need to join together to strengthen the rules-based order and define our Pacific prosperity. To that end, we have an extraordinary panel of participants that have agreed to join us for the next hour in this important discussion. First, we will have Ambassador Winston Chen, representative of TECO in Canada. We will have Mr. Akira Igata, Executive Director, Center for Rulemaking Strategies at the University of Tama. Mr. Jonathan Berkshire Miller, my partner and friend in crime at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the director of our Indo-Pacific work. And of course, Ms. Aditi Malhotra. She's the editor of the Journal for Intelligence, Propaganda, and Security Studies. Welcome to you all. Thank you all for taking some time today across the world to participate in this important discussion. To get started, I thought it might be best to turn first to Ambassador Chen, who represents the people of Taiwan, a great democracy in the Indo-Pacific, dealing with many strategic issues. As President Biden prepares to host this important summit, your leadership is arriving in Washington to participate as well. It's an important moment in the recognition of the Taiwanese people and of your democracy. So as we kind of get ready to kick off these discussions, which will begin in earnest on December 9th. Ambassador, I'd be curious to learn from you, what's the Taiwan expectation? What's the expectation of your government in these important proceedings? And give us a sense as to what you think Canada should be doing in this context.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for your kind introduction. I think this is a really golden opportunity for Taiwan to be invited to attend this important summit for democracy. And over the years, Taiwan have been isolated by the international society, and our representative and our experts are not allowed or permitted to attend those various kinds of meetings. So I think at this time we have already are going to send to a best representative on behalf of our countries and to express the position and the voice for people and the government of Taiwan. And our digital minister, Audrey Tang, and our representative to the Washington, D.C., Ambassador Bikin Shaw, who will be the two representatives to represent the government and the people of Taiwan. And I think for us, the expectation is that we want to tell our good story of Taiwan as a robust economic market, and also the very successful the democratic society and the country. And then we are hoping that not only we share our experience, but also we can learn from our friends in the international community, and then working together make the world a better place to live.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's a great and fine way to kick off this important discussion. So thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I'd like to go all the way around the world from Ottawa to Tokyo, where we have Akira Igata. We're so pleased that you're able to join us, good sir. Japan is a central player as one of the two great democracies together alongside India, among others, but we're going to talk about the larger ones right now. In the Indo-Pacific region, your leadership through successive administrations has made this a priority in global affairs, and the norms that govern it in the context of a strategic challenge is central to Tokyo. So from your perspective in Japan, when you look at this Summit of Democracy, what do you think would be the priorities of the Japanese government, and what can Canada glean from that?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am happy to take part of this great panel today. So I think that this Summit for Democracy is coming at a very interesting time here in Tokyo. And I say this because we're seeing a potential shift in Japan's value-based diplomacy in general. We've seen a flurry of new initiatives under the current Kishida administration because one, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida had stated during the recent LDP presidential election that he is determined to defend democracy amidst expanding authoritarianism by taking decisive action to protect stability in the Taiwan Strait, democracy in Hong Kong, and address Uyghur human rights issues. He also announced the appointment of Gen Nakatani, former defense minister and Japanese co-chair of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, as the newly created post of the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister for International Human Rights Issues, which is a brand new post. Kishida has also voiced support for the Human Rights Violation Sanctions Law, or the Japanese Magnitsky Act in Japan. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs have also recently announced the creation of a new post on human rights violations responses. And lastly, just this morning, the Sankei Shimbun reported that Kishida administration is internally considering a partial diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics by not sending a ministerial post to the Games. But amidst all this, I think it's important to remember that Japan's stance on human rights issues has been quite passive, since Japan's former stance on human rights diplomacy has been a little bit different from that of other Western democracies. MOFA's basic position on human rights has been to base its policy responses on dialogue and cooperation. Now, while this sounds good on paper, we must pay close attention and read between the lines that there is no mention of actions or sanctions. Japan has emphasized the importance of changing the behavior of human rights abusers through engagement, but it has largely refused to take punitive actions against persistent transgressions. And this has led to severe criticisms. For example, Jeff Kingston has asserted that Japan is the despot's accomplice in Asia, since it has been a prominent sponsor of Asian autocracies and illiberal democracies by downplaying human rights and democratic values in favor of maintaining trade ties and securing geostrategic advantage. So what we'd likely be seeing from Japan here on out is that these new initiatives from Kishida colliding with the old traditional modus operandi, and any changes that we'd see in Japan will likely be slow and glacial. So to conclude, my view is that the Summit of Democracy will be instrumental for Japan in promoting some of these new initiatives in Japan to begin the shift towards a more active human rights diplomacy from Japan. Thank you.
A more active, values-based human rights diplomacy from Japan across the Indo Pacific. It's an incredibly important insight, and I think it turns well to what I will be asking Aditi next. Aditi has spent some time, a great deal of time, studying the age of competition between the US and China, even before it became a watchword of the last decade. And so I thought it would be very good at this stage to see how, as India begins to exercise its role as a world power in the region, as a great democracy, it's pursuing new alignments as distinct from the non-aligned status that it had traditionally enjoyed during the Cold War itself. So Aditi, from a perspective in an Indian perspective on this Summit of Democracies, Prime Minister Modi is expected to arrive in Washington for these really important discussions. I'd be very keen to hear what your perspective is on what India's priorities might be.
Thank you, Shiva. As you rightly pointed out, this is a really crucial time for India because it wants to project itself as a serious actor in the Indo Pacific region. So we will see Prime Minister Modi using this summit as an opportunity to present India not only as a vibrant democracy, but also present India as a favorable destination for business and for much better strategic partnership and geostrategic partnerships. Interestingly, we will see India kind of projecting itself in contrast to the China model. And I presume that there would be discussions about, the concerns related to the Belt and Road Initiative in the Indo-Pacific and how countries such as India and Japan pose like an alternate model to the China and the Sinocentric model in the region. And I see that Prime Minister Modi would highlight some factors like Indian assistance to other continents or other countries in Asia and Africa with regard to their capacity building in terms of democracy. And although there are some concerns among the Indian decision makers on the fact that India may also open itself to some sort of scrutiny on the democratic indices. However, I think like this is something they're prepared with, and there are like so many positive factors in the democratic indices. So I presume that those would be highlighted in the summit. And overall, I think this would be a good opportunity to kind of utilize and get all the democracies together and find those areas of convergence and how the democracies can come together to actually present a united stand against the China model that we see in the Indo-Pacific today.
Excellent. What a great kickoff. I get to turn now to Jonathan Berkshire Miller because he has a few perspectives. He has been a longtime student of North Asia. He's obviously been focused in a great way on the politics of ASEAN and ASEAN nation states and Australia's role in shaping this decisive new order. So Jonathan, you're a Canadian, you work at a Canadian think tank, you're focused on what Canadian interests are. As you've heard our colleagues remark on what they view the priorities to be from places like Taiwan, Japan, and now India, what's your sense as to what the Summit of Democracy will mean for the wider Indo-Pacific region?
Well, thanks so much, Shuv. And it's great. It's always great to go last because I can crib ideas from everyone else's very good ones, and there's not much I would disagree with. First of all, I think it's important to sort of lay out the sort of the geostrategic context of what we're talking about and what's at stake here. And especially, I mean, this is not a context that has just been here this year, 2021, or the last few months, but this is a context that has been building over the last 2 decades. And just to give you an example of this, we have this Summit of Democracies happening this week. At the same time, not even in the Indo-Pacific, we have Russia at the gates of Ukraine again, a lot of challenges on the eastern flank of NATO, and then a host of different security challenges to democracies in the region in the Indo-Pacific. We don't need to sort of do the laundry list of them all, but whether it's the Taiwan Straits, the East China Sea, and tensions between China and Japan, or the South China Sea, and let's not forget North Korea, there's challenges in every door. So this is the important context to think about why this discussion is important. The second thing is thinking about the disparity of even the invite list, frankly. If you look, and I did a little bit of tabulating before this discussion, and 27 of the invited states are in the Western Hemisphere. So altogether, we have 27 in the Western Hemisphere, and if you include Europe, we have 66 in total. So 66 of the invites have been both in North America, South America, and Europe. You move over to the Indo-Pacific or Asia, and we only have 25. So I think this is startling in one sense of looking at the way that this has been structured and the way that some of the immense challenges that we have. The second important thing is to think of what is the backbone of promoting democracy and ensuring that it can be nurtured in this region. And I think I point to institutions, and I think this is why this sort of blunt comparison in the numbers between the transatlantic community and the Indo-Pacific is important. Is frankly, the transatlantic is not the Indo-Pacific. So when we're talking about democracy, when we're talking about institutions, anyone who's ever attended an APEC meeting or an ASEAN Regional Forum meeting, not only it might not be the most stimulating meeting, but they're not always the most effective organizations. It's not to say that they're unimportant. I think they're necessary, but what I've often said is they're sort of insufficient as well. And so this leads me to the point of what to do about it in this region. Is very much, it's not throwing out the institutions and saying we need to start from scratch, but we very much need to recognize the challenges within a lot of these institutions, find ways to nurture them, and find other ways, whether it's through ad hocs or mini-laterals, in order to address these challenges. So this is one of the, it's an opportunity, but it's frankly one of the big challenges when we're comparing the Indo-Pacific versus the transatlantic.
Yeah, excellent round to kick off this discussion. Ambassador, I'm going to be turning to you next here, first to see what your responses might be to some of our colleagues around the table. But let me pick up on something that you opened our conversation today with. You mentioned Taiwan as a friend, a partner, and a model. And Jonathan just remarked about how there are institutional challenges in the region to negotiate how democracies can cooperate with one another as well as deepen their resilience, and that there are challenges around every corner. I think that's perhaps most acutely true for the people of Taiwan, who have to deal with a growing threat, not just of disinformation or cyber attacks, but physical threats through the Taiwan Strait and flyovers over the island. There are many challenges that I think Taiwan is most acutely attuned to. So as you look at this Russian army amassing at the gates of Ukraine, the Summit of Democracy, President Joe Biden's diplomacy today with Vladimir Putin, and upcoming diplomacy with democratic nations around the world, how confident are you that the democratic world will stand by Taiwan in the face of increased Chinese aggression?
Well, thank you, Xu. I think everyone agreed the situation in the Indo Pacific region is becoming more tense and complex, well, by the day. And we are facing, particularly in Taiwan, we have been facing the gray zone tactics and the posed by the authoritarian regime across the Taiwan Strait. And on daily basis, we facing the frequent military harassment in Taiwan's southwestern air defense identification zone, and we call it ADIZ, and not to mention the cyber attacks and misinformation, and then disinformation campaign, and then influence the operation, particularly targeting Taiwanese people and the government. So that means that the democratic Taiwan has been threatened by bigger countries. And then everybody have to realize the fact that Taiwan's key role in the semiconductor industry, and we are part of a very important supply chain. So the strategic location within the Forza Island chain for Taiwan and its role as a frontline countries in defending the universal value and then democratic institution. So we cannot imagine the fall of Taiwan will be cause any challenge or difficulty to everyone on this planet. And it also makes people who believe in freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, they will have really doubts on whether they should keep fighting for values. And I humbly suggest that, like-minded country, if you agree, forge a strong democratic alliance and push back the authoritarian regime's aggression and then coercive diplomacy. And then if we allow democracy to stand up to authoritarian actors alone without any support, I think we will send a very wrong signal to the outside world. And that's a reason why I think we have to work together, and the other democracy will certainly will help us. And also, last but not least, I'm glad to see many democracies are increasingly wake up to the reality and then becoming more vocal when they see other democracy under threat and the pressures. As you can see, the G7, NATO, EU, and the Quad have all highlighted the importance of peace and then security in the Taiwan Strait, while expressing concern over whether or not China's intention unilaterally to underline the status quo of peace and the stability and the security in the Indo Pacific region. And we are happy to see that American and the Canadian warship sailing together through the Taiwan Strait in early October, which demonstrate the very strong commitment to the free and open Indo Pacific, certainly it sends a very positive signal to our friends and allies as well.
Free and open Indo Pacific and the coalitions that are working to secure it. Akira, I'm coming to you next because I think Japan plays such a central role in shaping that security architecture. On one side, we've watched ASEAN as an institution struggle to adapt with the norms of democracy through the games played by neighboring authoritarians and the proxies that they deploy around that table, frustrating consensus or progress. Yet ASEAN democracies are interested in moving forward. They have to make a decision between the authoritarian model of development being proposed by the Belt and Road Initiative and a more opaque model of development proposed through international finance institutions, regional development banks, and an emerging security partnership manifest in the Quadrilateral Strategic Dialogue. Much has evolved in the last couple of years, and I know you've been commenting a great deal about how these values underpin the rulemaking of the Indo-Pacific region. But when you hear Ambassador Chen describe his expectation that democracies can get their acts together and support one another in the face of authoritarian aggression, in Japan, when you look across this neighborhood, where do you see the best opportunities for the most gains for democracies to cooperate both in the realm of security, but also in the realm of trade and prosperity? I'm afraid you're on mute, my friend.
Sorry about that. So thank you so much for that. I think there was a lot to unpack there, but you're right. Authoritarian aggression comes in various forms, and we have to make sure that we take care of the military issues, economic issues, and values-based issues. Having that said, I think that as Ambassador Chen mentioned, I want to touch on the issue of the importance of the how the democratic countries can come together and deal with some of the economic coercion coming from China. Because in Japan, there's currently what I call an economic security awakening happening here in Japan, with the Kishida administration naming the world's first economic security minister, him making this new law called Economic Security Promotion Act, which would likely be introduced to the Diet next year to strengthen some of the Japanese supply chain vulnerabilities, as well as strengthening Japan's R&D on emerging technologies. Various Japanese ministries and agencies have announced the creation of a new economic security administration, economic security divisions. We have decided to give a new economic package to stimulate Japan's critical technology development. And then you see all of this development, not just from the government, but also from the private sector, with major Japanese business federations such as the Keidanren, Japan Business Federation, Japan Association of Corporate Executives, and Japan Association of New Economy, all saying that we need to strengthen economic security so that we can protect our technology, that we can protect our vulnerabilities in our global supply chains, and then to be able to respond to some of the arbitrary use of economic coercion from certain countries like China. And my argument recently has been that democratic countries should come together and form some kind of a defense mechanism, or at least a deterrent mechanism, in order to deter certain uses of economic coercion. For instance, we have seen various times how China have leveraged its import, export, foreign students, and foreign travelers' dependence on China against other smaller countries in order to gain some of the geopolitical advantages. These forms of economic statecraft or economic coercion, in my view, can be deterred if democratic countries come together. For instance, if China decides to say, okay, unless you decide to conform to some of our views, then we're going to stop the exports of, for example, critical minerals to your country. Then the democratic countries can all come together and say, well, if you're going to stop your export of critical minerals to country A, then the rest of the democratic countries would stop the export of X, Y, and Z to China. Now, that would hurt both of us. We both don't want to do that. And hopefully this kind of initiative would be able to deter the countries from arbitrary uses of economic coercion. And that's one of the reasons why I have been an economic security advisor to this new international organization called the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, or IPAC, which now has 21 parliaments, so that's 20 democratic countries and the EU Parliament, coming together to unify some of our China policies together. Thanks.
I have a sense that my colleague Jonathan will want to chime in. So Jonathan, over to you.
Well, thank you. I just want to very quickly add, I mean, Akira brings up a very excellent point on economic security and dealing with coercion. And obviously, from a Canadian perspective, we've been dealing with this not only in the economic realm, but obviously with the detention of our citizens. But specifically on economic coercion, and I think this is something you're very right on. But how do we, in tangible terms, make this a reality? And I think a lot of our European friends, whether it's Lithuania or the Czech Republic, are also dealing with this. And I think you're right. I think that right now the economic security issues are being dealt very nationally and in sovereign terms. But that's exactly the situation that China and others would like. Because if states deal with that nationally without collaborating together, and just to give you one example, if all of a sudden Australian wine is not flowing from Australia to China, maybe that wine will come from France, or maybe that wine will come from elsewhere. So how do we set up a system in place that we know that cannot be circumvented? So I think it's a really, really excellent point, but I definitely think there needs to be a lot more collaborations amongst key democracies on this point.
Thank you, Akira. Do you have a comment on that?
Sure. So that's why I think it's really important for us to have basically an economic security version of the Shangri-La dialogue. And I want to call it the Tokyo dialogue, and have all of the democratic countries come to Tokyo and discuss about this, because I think there are various ways of tackling this. And at the moment, I think that every country has a somewhat different kind of definition of what it means to strengthen economic security. So first, it's really important to kind of nail down what economic security means for all of us, and then discuss about, well, what would be the right way of countering some of these economic coercions. For example, one way is being a little bit more active, like I said, coming up with a deterrent strategy. But then there's also another way of doing it, which is basically a counter boycott, right? It's what happened with Taiwanese pineapples when the Chinese decided that we're not going to buy Taiwanese pineapples anymore. The Japanese public just went and bought all of these Taiwanese pineapples that was supposed to go to China, but then brought to Japan. And I actually wanted to buy these pineapples, but within like 4 or 5 days, it all went. It was all sold out. So I think this kind of less provocative modes of counter strategies do exist as well, and there are others. So I think that first, it's really important for us to have a Tokyo dialogue on economic security.
So Tokyo dialogue notwithstanding, Akira, you're a great representative of the people of Japan. Tokyo dialogue notwithstanding, the point is well taken in this discussion so far, because we've touched upon a really critical issue, which is the weaponization of commerce. In traditional terms, prior to China's rise as a challenger to the international system with their own authoritarian model, commerce was seen to be pretty innocuous and free-flowing. Which required a different set of discussions than security was. But now in Japan, as Akira has indicated, we are seeing the emergence of economic security being leveled up to a minister cabinet post, and a multinational dialogue being proposed on how democracies can secure their economies. I think this is a great pivot to Aditi for a Delhi perspective and an India perspective on a couple of levels. One, India is a country that, with 1.4 billion people, has been pursuing deep economic reforms over the course of the last decade. Many of these reforms have affected everything from identity citizenship to agricultural reforms to banking reforms, the advent of a GST, the formalization of the economy through a national push towards the digitization of the Indian economy. And at the same time, we've seen India secure its digital economy by banning PRC and authoritarian participation across a spate of different companies, which is a significant market that Chinese companies will not be able to access. When you look at India, many commentators have been attempting to criticize the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, his steps toward the democratic formalization and economic emancipation of India. What's your assessment on what you described in your opening comments about how India is being assessed by global indices for its democracy and its democratic performance?
Thank you, Shiva. Like, that's an interesting observation you make. And as I pointed out before, I think this is something that the Indian policymakers are aware of. Like, this is what opens India to some sort of criticism. So, like, to begin with, the fact is that India is not a perfect democracy. India has many flaws like any other democracies. But more so in the recent years, as you pointed out, there have been a lot of reforms and a lot of new laws, such as, the Citizenship Amendment Act, or the removal of Article 370, or even the agriculture reforms, which were, brought in swiftly and suddenly. That does sometimes make the appearance as if there's this sort of compromise on democracy. However, if you look at how most of them end up being, either some of them have proved to be helpful for India's security and stability, and on the other aspects, even though politically it may not come across as such, but the government has actually taken on board the concerns of some of the citizens. Like, if you look at the agriculture reforms, and then if you see the ensuing protests, you see how the government came on board and started actually talking to the farmers about, okay, what more can be done. And you also see about the CAA, the concerns about, the combination of the CAA with the NRC. We do not see those rules coming up now. So it also, again, kind of says that things are not as they were expected. Like, for someone like me who's personally criticized some of those moves, like, you do see that yes, there is merit on some aspects, and then there are compromises. However, like, that does not mean that one writes off India as a vibrant democracy. The fact that India still has been home to one of the largest protests in the world shows that there's enough space for dissent in India. The electronic media, despite its usual suspects and flaws, remains vibrant when it comes to criticism of the government and similar aspects. And it's also important to notice that even though, the current day government may come across as authoritarian and someone which has way too much clout, but if you see the recent elections, whether it is key state elections or even the recent bipolar elections, we do not see BJP getting the numbers. So it's not that there's this whole new sort of authoritarianism in India. I think the opposition may be a relatively weak aspect. However, there are a lot of positive aspects. So I would not kind of say that everything is bad. But as I said before, it's not perfect. It has its flaws, but it's also work in progress.
No, let me continue on this because I really appreciate that context setting when it comes to India, Aditi, because while we're seeing tectonic economic reforms being pursued inside the country, I mean, the agricultural reform proposals impacted 50% of the population that only produce 15% of the GDP. It's a necessary leveling up of India's democracy for its own economic performance. But we're also seeing India pursue a new type of economic diplomacy around the world when it comes to engaging Japan, especially in trade and infrastructure development, and targeted relationships around the world. When you see India's awakening from a $2.5 to $5 trillion economy over the next decade, it will have to come to ground on how it partners with the kind of supply chains it could produce and be part of in the world and in the Indo Pacific region. So as you see India's evolution moving forward, and being demonstrated at the Summit for Democracy, what do you think Canada should take away from that when it comes to the relationship with India and with cooperating among democracies?
Again, a really good point. I guess there's a lot of untapped energy when it comes to, say, India and Canada relations, particularly. Like, there are a lot of areas of convergence, and these may not be purely security in nature, or they may not be, specifically economic in nature. However, if you just see the current, levers that exist between the two bilateral equations, I think there's a lot that can be worked on. Like, if you look at Canada and India relations specifically, not just in terms of the social equations that exist, however, in terms of economics, like India, as you pointed out, is slated to be one of the largest ones, and it's naturally a growing economy. And this is an area where Canada can tap into. Like, there is a lot of scope when it comes to supply chain management, because India, as you pointed out, is already invested in building capacity building and infrastructure in not just Asian countries, but also Africa. And if Canada continues and wants to be seen as a relevant and an important actor in the Indo Pacific region, it's worthwhile partnering with some of the countries in the region which are already doing a lot. So it's not that Canada would have to come up with new ideas. It can actually start complementing aspects which already exist. And then, of course, come up with areas where both the countries can utilize their, advantageous aspects and work together.
Excellent. Much appreciated. Ambassador, I'm going to come back to Taiwan. When we look at these economic partnerships, and Taiwan is such a huge engine of economic growth for the region, it also manages a very complex relationship with mainland China and Chinese industry. You identified critical supply chains that in semiconductors and other electronics, Taiwan is indispensable. And of course, Akira described the great value of Taiwanese pineapples, which I'm sure are lovely. I have yet to try one. What I would love to ask you, though, Ambassador, is at the Summit of Democracy, this might be the most public recognition of Taiwan and its aspirations as a democratic partner in the international system. What happens in the ensuing months? How do we begin to even deepen the partnerships that Taiwan can present across the Indo Pacific in existing institutions, or perhaps with new dialogues, new partners, new supply chains that Taiwan can more actively participate in? From your perspective, what would you say are the priorities that you would be pursuing from a Taiwanese economic diplomacy preferencing democracies?
Thank you, Shu. I would like to respond to your big question with a very simple answer. Is that we have a high percentage dependency for our trade with China, and roughly accounts for, including Hong Kong, accounts for 40% of our total trade. So it's really a big challenge that how could we properly to adjust when we facing the challenge from China politically and then diplomatically. But in the meantime, we have a heavy dependency for our trade and the investment on China. And over the years, the government and the people work together with the industry. We want to shift some part of our industry to ASEAN country. So we introduced the new southbound policy to establish more connection with the ASEAN country, including India, Australia, and New Zealand. And we partly successful to shift some supply chain to those countries. But having said that, everyone agreed that China is a big market for everyone. So Taiwan is no exception. But we have to balance with the challenge for those market, which they didn't follow the international norms and regulation, and then they weaponize the business. And if you are not to consent their suggestion, and they will punish you anytime. That's the reason why our pineapple, our star fruit, and others agricultural produce have been punished in the last few months. But I think we have a very strong determination, particularly the industry, agricultural sector, and the government. We work together, and we always try to be prepared to find a good solution for when one sector has a challenge. We seeking for support from neighboring country market, and also domestically. We try to adjust and try to consume and help those sectors that have been punished. But I think the better solution is, as I suggest earlier, like-minded country have to work together, and so not the Taiwan alone can solve this challenge. we have to work with the like-minded country, which they share the same fate like us. And Australia wine have been punished, and then coconut oil in Canada, and the beef and others. So we repeat the same experience, but we didn't really take it serious to find a solution, because we have been attracted to that huge market, and then we believe that probably after some period of time we can go back to normal, well, which is not the case. I think if I may, I will give some the President Tsai in her National Day speech. He gave the 4 commitments and encouraged people in Taiwan to, even we facing this huge challenge from the big country China across the Taiwan Strait, but we still have open and mind prepared to discussion with them, and they without precondition, as long as they didn't say that we are part of them. And also we think and we believe that maintain the status quo in the region for Taiwan, and then the ultimate goal is to make sure that people living in this region have the safety, security, and then prosperity as before. And then those 4 commitments, number 1 is that the commit to a free and then democratic constitution system. That's not going to change. And the second is that Republic of China, Taiwan, and the PRC should not be subordinate to each other. And the number 3 is that Taiwan is going to resist annexation or encroachment upon our sovereignty. And then last but not least is that future of the Taiwan must be decided in accordance with the will of 23.5 million population of Taiwan. And so that's 4 commitments, not only I think fit for Taiwan to carry on our duty in the future when we facing the challenge from China, but also I think that will be a takeaway to our friends in the region, that everyone share the same fate, and then we are so challenged our democratic institution and then freedom and the rule of law, the way of life. But if we are not going to have a strong commitment to protect them and then to safeguard them, then tomorrow we are going to have a challenge. So as a friend in the democratic camp, we have to work together. And it's not just for lip service, but we have to take action. And slowly and surely, I think that I would like to raise a good example that in recent months for Taiwan, we established a very good relationship with Baltic states, and then particularly in Lithuania announced that it would host a representative office using the name, the Taiwanese representative office. And China is extremely upset and then stopped approving export permits for Lithuania producers and as a punishment, and then downgrade its diplomatic relations for the with that country, and the recalling its ambassador from its capital and order Lithuania to leave Beijing. But we quickly saw the senior official from the United States and from the European Union, from the NATO and other states step forward to support the sovereign decision-making of the Lithuania to develop their relationship with Taiwan, free of pressure and the coercion. I think that's extremely important. With the kind of a timely and strong support from the major countries, so a small democracy have the strength to counter pressure from authoritarian region like China. And now we look forward to see more cooperation and exchange between not only the Baltic states, but also the country all over the world. And they can have a better relationship with Taiwan. And also for our relationship Taiwan to my post in Canada, I think my biggest strength is that we can to establish a very framework relationship which is not going to change by the political parties or change of the government, but instead we can move forward as always and doing business as always. That's the two priority for my agenda will be to sign the FIPA with Canada and the Foreign Investment and the Protection Act, and also the CPTPP. We're seeking Canadian government's support to include Taiwan as a member of that big business club. And I think with this kind of a framework engagement, and we can have the very strong and robust relationship with Canada. And I think this approach is the mutually beneficial, not only for Taiwan, but also for the industry and the business connection in this great country of Canada. And our networking in ASEAN country in Asia, well, it happened to be a hub and a gateway for Canadian business and the industry. I think that can help us not only to counter the challenge from the authoritarian government like China, but also we can have a better balance for the to engage with a democratic country. So that's my small contribution. Yeah.
An immense one. Thank you for taking on such a big question and taking it on so thoroughly. I think you've touched upon a lot of critical aspects of specific things Canada can do to embrace Taiwan as a partner, but also the lessons learned from the Taiwanese experience with partners like Lithuania and other countries being bullied. Akira, I'm going to come to you really quickly because rulemaking is something you think about it a lot, you write about it extensively. And as you've likely seen in Ottawa, we have a new Minister of National Defense, we have a new Foreign Affairs Minister. In Ottawa, there's a great focus on Canadian strategy for the Indo Pacific region, which we hope pen to paper will be put to fairly soon. Can't come soon enough. But as officials and ministers are contemplating what the Canadian interest is here, as somebody who provides that advice to the interparliamentary group and considers what democracies can do, how would you distill your recommendations into 2 or 3 top line priorities that absolutely are essential in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy?
Thanks so much. So I think that the John has told me about 2 years ago that the Indo-Pacific strategy is coming out next month. And then the months after, they said, oh, it's coming. And it's been 2 years. So I'm once again, fingers crossed that it does come out very soon. But if I am to just, mention 2 or 3 potential priorities for the Canadian government in terms of the Canadian interest in the Indo-Pacific and what can be included in the strategy, one, I think, should be perhaps CPTPP, as Ambassador Chen mentioned. So for those of you who may not know too much, who may not be aware, for a new country to be admitted into the CPTPP, every single party country must agree to this. So even if there's just one single country that decides to veto the entrance of Taiwan into CPTPP, then Taiwan would not be included. But in every single measures, I think Taiwan is ready to be admitted to CPTPP. So if, for example, Canada, along with other like-minded countries like Japan, can try their best so that we can perhaps nudge some of the other TPP members who may be thinking of using a veto to block Taiwanese accession and say that, okay, if you decide not to use your veto powers, then we can help you with X, Y, and Z. Then that would be a very important way for Canada to strengthen the trade relationship among the Indo Pacific. So that's definitely one thing that Canada could be considering. Another thing that should be one of the headliners is probably to play to Canada's strengths, which is the various critical minerals that Canada has. Canada has announced its critical minerals strategy a couple of months ago, or even earlier this year, I think. And I believe that Canada mentioned about identified 31 critical minerals that's important for the economic security of not just Canada, but to its partners and allies. And because we live in a world where many of the democratic countries are strategically reliant on China for many of these critical minerals that are essential for creating IT products and high-end electronics, I think it's really important for Canada to start selling what kind of capacity and what kind of materials Canada has to offer to all of these countries to say that, look, we can help in diversifying away some of your strategic reliance on China on critical minerals.
Excellent suggestions, very specific, and I think very, very right on the money. And also a test to see how committed Canada is in terms of shaping the democratic rules and norms of the region as an active Pacific nation. So Jonathan, I'm going to come to you really quickly because I want to get a perspective from the partners you've engaged in places like Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, etc. You know, when you're thinking of ASEAN nation states and how Canada could pursue deeper cooperation across the Indo-Pacific in partnership with great democracies like Japan, India, Taiwan, you know, what would you say, Jonathan, are your, you know, biggest priorities for how those countries can be engaged?
Well, thanks very much. You know, so much I want to comment on, but I'll save myself for afterwards. As I could have mentioned, sorry, I feel like the chicken running around saying the sky is falling down on the Indo-Pacific strategy. Somebody did tell me it was coming out, but trust me, you know, I'm hoping that this will definitely in the early part of the new year. I've been on the record for that. So 2 points. I think Akira very much rightly brought up the Trans-Pacific Partnership being one element. I mean, that's a key element of Canada's engagement now with members of ASEAN. But sort of 2 observations I'd like to touch on. I think this is particularly important to Canada's relationships in Southeast Asia, but this would be true, and Aditi's good discussion on the India relationship, I think, fits into this in some way too. Is number 1, the art of the tangible. So we should be doing things that are, and feeding into institutions that are actually tangibly doing things. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership is one clear example of this. It's an actual thing. It's an actual multilateral agreement that has high ambitions on trade. Another tangible institution that's been around for a while and I think is underutilized is the Asian Development Bank, based in Manila, based in the Philippines, and doing great work. So I think there's a narrative often that, you know, China has created this big bank, had the AIIB, and all of a sudden the ADB doesn't do anything, but that's not really the case. So I think number 1, focus on the art of the tangible. I absolutely agree that we should be doing things that are in our niche. You know, we can't be everyone everywhere. We're not the same as the United States. We're not the same as Japan, but we can play off and collaborate with our partners. The second, and I think this is a really important point, is there's a big empathy gap happening, frankly. And I think some of the discussion on the imperfections of democracy, this goes back to my original comments of the fact that the transatlantic is not the Indo-Pacific. So the way that we frame and think about democracies needs to take that into account. We can't sort of stroll into these multilateral meetings and expect them to be the same ones that we have in The Hague or that we have in Brussels. It's just not going to work that way. So we have to understand these imperfections. We don't have to apologize for them. We have to obviously stand by our values and interests and call out partners and friends when needed. But at the same point, we have to have an empathy. We need to meet halfway in a sense. So I think this is going to be a big challenge for our Indo-Pacific strategy, is realizing, you know, what are our equities, what are our strategic interests, and what are the priorities of our partners. So rather than just essentially talking to our partners and saying, this is what Canada wants to do, this is what we're going to do, I think we actually need to listen a bit more. So that would be my broad sort of perspective on that.
No, excellent, and I'm grateful for that, because I think it fits in really well with what I'd like to ask Aditi next. Listening and having empathy requires learning from the experience of others. And for India, I'm curious, Aditi, from your perspective, how have democracies historically played a role in making India an Indo Pacific player? As a great democracy, it's obviously been petitioned by its neighborhood often. It has a hot contest with China underway. Narendra Modi just hosted Vladimir Putin on a security compact meeting, but also some other economic diversification. It's a dangerous neighborhood India's in. So from your perspective, tell us, how does India navigate cooperating with democracies in its own neighborhood?
Indeed, you've covered it really well, Shiva. So the fact is, yes, India is in a really precarious neighborhood. But what's interesting, and I would also like to draw some parallels of the Canada of today and the India of the 2000s, like the early 2000s. India was always reluctant to go beyond like the South Asian region when it came to the security aspect. India was always sensitive about not being projected as a hardcore security actor. However, if we see, there was this inflection point which came in 2004 due to the Indian Ocean tsunami. And we see 4 democracies coming together, which was India, Japan, US, and Australia, which formed the Tsunami Core Group and actually got together in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations. And that was a point where India realized the importance of actually getting involved in non-traditional security aspects. And since then, there's only been progress. Like India has not just, been building its own capacity, but helping other countries, other littorals, not just in maritime capacity and infrastructure capacity, but also in terms of building capacities for humanitarian aid and disaster relief. And I think this is one area, again, where Canada could, chime in, contribute monetarily or in terms of their experience, because with the whole climate change, it's natural. We all we don't want it, but we know that we're likely to see more and more tsunamis and other natural disasters. And this is an area where, traditionally democracies always perform well. They could come together, and these are like non-traditional security aspects and also relevant to human security. So just as India became a much more relevant actor through that 2004 tsunami operations with other democracies, I see that, there's a lot to gain in terms of how Canada could also take it.
That's fantastic. Listen, we only just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you a quick. I'll afford each of you 30 seconds of time to expand a point that you've already made, or to touch upon a point of one of your colleagues. Ambassador, I'll start with you first, and I'll work my way down the list, and I'll close out this fantastic conversation. So, Ambassador Chen, over to you. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Shu. I think after this discussion, I learned a lot, and I firmly believe that we are really like-minded, and we respect human rights, and we safeguard the principle and the values, and I think we are on the right side of the history. And from now on, we have to work together and fighting for the good cause. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Akira, over to you.
Thanks. All I want to say is I really liked John's points about the importance of us focusing on the art of the tangible. And you're right, there are institutions that's actually doing something really important. And then there are others which are more about just, talking without taking any actions. So I just want to say that it's really important for countries like Canada and Japan and other democratic countries to figure out which institutions are really critical and doing things, and then try and strengthen those institutions.
Thank you very much. Jonathan?
Yeah, 2 very quick points on this. Number one, I think we need to look at this process and this summit process as evergreen. So it cannot be an ad hoc, it cannot be a one-off, but we have to see this as a constant evolution, a constant process. So that's an important overarching point. And the second one are the actors that are engaging in this process. So there are more than just the track one. It's more than just foreign ministries, or trade ministries that are working on this, but civil society, private sector, think tanks, media. There's so many important actors that need to engage in this for this to be successful. So we need to think about this in a multi-pronged way.
Okay, Aditi, over to you.
I just have one point. Like, we no longer live in a bipolar world. We're living in multipolar world, and the world is getting flatter. So it's for the secondary actors and the middle powers to come together with or without US leadership and actually find areas where they can work and build a sustainable model in terms of, targeting the China Sinosphere and actually keeping the democracies alive.
Well, I couldn't have put it better myself. Listen, Ambassador Winston Wen-Yi Chen, Mr. Akira Igata, Jonathan Berkshire Miller, Aditi Malhotra, thank you for a fantastic kickoff conversation to the upcoming Summit of Democracy. As Canadians tune in, they could not ask for a better primer in this discussion for how to consider the events that will unfold over the next couple of days in Washington, D.C. Permit me to conclude on a quick comment and observation. Authoritarians, by virtue of the model of their government, have the benefit of being efficient. But those efficiencies are not long-term and ultimately not usually for the public benefit. Democracies, by definition, are messy. Our cooperation is sporadic and at times take longer than we wish for it to be successful. But inherently, democracies are more successful as a model of government that limits the role of government and enhances the vibrant civil societies that exist within them. And so with that optimism, I'd love to close out this discussion hosted here on a Tuesday night. And what is it, Wednesday morning, Akira, or Tuesday morning? I'm confused. My clock is upside down.
It's Wednesday morning here.
Good morning to you, good sir. I want to thank you all for a fantastic conversation here at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute for Canada, the Summit of Democracies. Thank you all very well. Be safe and see you soon.